So if you could share a few key moments in your journey that really have led you to this book, Corey.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Rich. For those who I'll tell you verbally, I'm holding up the book if you don't end up seeing a video of it. But yeah, the book is called The Enlightened Passenger, and quite honestly, it's funny because depending on the person listening, I know some people are very skeptical, and some people are, let's say, believe in things outside of themselves. And so I will say, for me, the book definitely seemed to be channeled to me, if not through me. And that's the part I say that not everybody believes in that. All I can say, and maybe I'll say if it isn't true, I was given some amazing inspiration from somewhere. And I say this because the book felt like it wrote itself. It felt effortless. And I've written multiple books. Some have felt like they didn't feel like work, but there was still effort, if that makes sense. I still had to, structure them and do all this stuff. This book here, and maybe because it's only my second ever fictional work, but maybe because it's fictional, it's more of a story. It felt like it just came to life, but the characters came to life. I felt like I knew who the characters were. Like everything came to life in real time as I was writing it. But the other side of that was that when I finished writing it, I was like, wow, like it feels almost complete. And my other books I had written didn't feel almost complete. Like I felt like, okay, they flowed well, they felt okay, but I still got to do a lot of editing. This book here didn't feel like that. And so, but I didn't know for sure. So I will say, Rich, one of the things we did, and I'll circle back to answer fully the question of the inspiration behind, but one of the things that we did to find out if I was right or wrong in my assessment was we went out to people in my network and said, who'd be willing to read this book and give us their feedback? And we did what I'll call a beta group of maybe 25 people. And honestly, I was floored that the most common statement was, we had one person who said they think yoga is pseudoscience. So we like this book, as you've read it, it's not heavily spiritual, but for somebody who thinks yoga is pseudoscience, it's not going to probably be the book for them, because we talk about synchronicity, at least like meaningful coincidences. And so with the book, on the beta readers, let's say if it was 25 people, 24 came back and said, here's some grammar issues, but if I ignore the grammar, this book's ready to go. I wish I could buy it right now. And so I thought, wow, like the fact that they're ignoring the grammar, they're telling me what the grammar is, but they're saying if that's fixed, I wouldn't change anything. There were out of those 24, there might have been like 4 that said, oh, did you think about this? But it was small things. And so I was like, this feels weird, because I'm always taught you're supposed to write a crappy book and then edit the heck out of it. And I'm not saying, I can't speak for my own work, but I'm just saying I was shocked that A, it felt like that when I finished it, and then B, the beta group came back kind of saying similar. Now, I had 2 editors go through it. We did make changes. I removed all the talk in the book about purpose and passion, which didn't fit, even though I wanted to leave it in, but I trusted the editor. So there were things removed. I'm not saying it was done, but the editing was very like painless, which is unreal, not normal for editing. Every other editing I've been a part of has been painful. And so I just feel like the book felt channeled. And then to finish that off, because I know I went a bit long in this tangent, is just to say the inspiration behind it was that it's built around, I don't want to go into too much detail and give away stuff, but it's built around a question that I ask frequently. And the question kind of said, I said, what if that question was real life? So it spawned this idea. And I knew by the time I was ready to write, I knew the beginning and the end, which again is another thing's rare. I knew the ending. I just didn't know how I was going to get there. And then I spent a year going, I need to write that book. And every now and then I would think, okay, this character should do this. And I would literally make a note, like, and it was random. It was like, I have an envelope beside me. It was like it ran on an envelope. And I'm like, oh, I better not lose that. Like, it wasn't even like in my journal or anything where I normally write stuff, but I was writing stuff, or I'd text myself and say, oh yeah, don't forget this. But that's all I did for a year. And then we went on a family vacation for 2 weeks at a cottage. And there's a few things my family does that I'm not as into. For example, swimming. I like the beach, but I'm not a swimmer. So I would go down with them to the beach, but I said, I'm going to write. To me, that's like vacation too. And so I wrote half of the book on that 2-week vacation. And then here's the interesting part. Then I would hack away at it like a few pages at a time. It still wasn't finished for another year. So in 2 weeks, I got a half the book done. And then it took me another 50 weeks to get the rest done. And then, so that was 2 years by the time the idea and then the rough draft was done. And then it's been a year since. But how it was inspired by me asking this question and then thinking, what if that idea was in a book? And then the book came to life as a fictional parable.
Terrific. No, I completely understand. I wrote a book that came out in the middle of COVID, and I felt the same way, that the book kind of came through me, and the writing was a really neat spiritual practice for me, where I didn't worry. I just sat down and wrote, and the words flowed. And you're saying something very similar, so that was neat, and I love the way you wrote it at the beach, and then you wrote it much later, and even some of the things of jotting things down, texting yourself things, writing notes. I do the same thing. I have a thought, I capture it and say, someday I might use that again. So how did you, and then you kind of said it, and I loved what you said in the book, where you say, this book that you're reading now simply came through me, that it was written by me, but it felt like it was a gift that was given to me and therefore came through me. If you can think back on that, how did you allow this gift that was given to you to come through you? How did you just let it to flow out of you? If that's an easy question to ask, how did it just naturally flow out of you, and why, maybe?
Yeah. So it's a great question to ask. And so for me, so I think everybody has their own little superpowers, and I have lots of faults and lots of things I do well. So I never want it to come across as an ego thing. And it's not even actually, I can't even take credit for it. But one of my superpowers is my memory. So I can remember meeting with so and so at 12 o'clock noon on a Friday. It's crazy. I have like a photographic memory. So that makes it really good. I do a lot of interviews. So it makes it really good, because if let's say I might know 75 facts about Jack Canfield, and then another 100 from the last interview I did with them. So then I can say, Jack, last time I was talking to you. But not everybody has that. Some people are like, did I talk to Jack before? So it's both sides. But I remember really well. So I can say, I remember exactly when I was writing especially because the going through me, obviously, when I first came with the idea and all that, then it just sat dormant. That's the only reason I can even maybe make the argument about not channeled, is because usually if it's channeled, you can't just sit with it for a year and it still come out and still come to life like that. Usually it has to get out now, or it goes to the next person, if you believe that stuff. So for me, I will say that I can remember, because it was that 2 weeks is when really it started dumping out. Meaning it wasn't the year I came up with the idea, it was when I started writing. And so how I did it, honestly, I'd love to, again, make a sexy answer that I sat and meditated and said, let it come, and then, all that. But the truth is, I think I'm one of those people. So I'm a songwriter as well. And when I wrote my first song at age 12, same deal. Like I sat down, and I don't know where. Here's the interesting part, Rich. I played guitar, I played chords. People listening don't play guitar probably don't know when I say the term power chord what it means, but I didn't know what a power chord was. And yet I wrote my first song with 3 power chords that were actually chords, and I didn't even know they were. And so I can play the song either way. But I wrote that at age 12. The song came through me. I put it up there with almost any song I've written. But the words came the day I wrote the song, like in minutes. Almost every song I've written that I've been most proud of has happened in real time. Like if it's an 8-minute song, most aren't 8 minutes, but if it's an 8-minute song, it took me 9 minutes to write it. And so I think that's a gift I sort of was given early on. So I think when you've been given that gift and it served you on the songwriting side,
Right.
I would have no reason, in my opinion, to fight it on the writing side, creative writing side. Having said that, though, I get so excited about the characters coming to life that I just feel like I wish I didn't have to type, so I could just visually watch this movie. So I was like, I can't type fast enough to bring this thing to life, which, by the way, I'll say the harder part was not letting it come through me and being detached enough to let that happen. The hardest part with me was to put it on the shelf after that vacation and not finish it right away. If I had 2
Right.
more weeks of vacation, I would have finished the rough draft on that. I will say this is a little known fact. So you're getting the part that I'm not sharing often. I've actually written the next 2 books in the series. So
Oh,
it wasn't even
neat.
intended to be a series. Since you've read the book, I'll tell you, it kind of explains the shock in it. It actually
Okay.
explains how it's possible. So I've written 3 books. And what's wild is I tried to make them different from each other, because I always find if there's a trilogy, other than like Lord of the Rings and that, but if it's a trilogy of certain sorts, a lot of times book number 2 doesn't sell as well, it's considered weaker. Book 3 is considered the weakest, just like movies. And I wanted them to be different enough. So the second book is from the perspective of, since and it doesn't give away anything, Treb's wife. And Treb's not even really that much in it, but it's from her perspective. And then the third book is from a family member of theirs, and it's actually from the first person perspective, and it's 2 characters who each speak lines. So it's each their perspective, because I wanted the books to follow the same story, like the continuation, but I want it to be different enough. But the fascinating part is all three books came out the way I just told you. And the next two, part 2 and 3, which I have no idea when they'll ever be out, was both were written on separate trips to the UK. So those long flights to London. But what's weird is I wrote the full books and they're about the same size in like days. Whereas this one took like 2 years plus the year of creativity, or I'll say 2 years plus the year to get it released. So I know, again, I went into a long tangent, but the answer is I didn't fight the process, and I wasn't even done yet. And when the first one was done, I had to keep going. So not only did I have to let it be channeled, I had to realize there was more than just one book here.
Right. No, and I guess if I look back and think about my own writing experience where it just felt right, I guess I just trusted the process and I let it happen. And obviously I didn't try to write if I was anxious or tired, then that's not the time to write. So no, that's wonderful. And it's neat to know that there's 2 more books coming, because yeah, toward the end of the book, and I won't ruin for the audience and let one of them to read it, I sort of, what, when at the close to the end of the book, and then I'm thinking I need to know more. So I'm glad that you're telling me there's 2 more books. So that's great. So this might be a loaded question. So maybe just pick one point. Why did you write The Enlightened Passenger? How will it help readers? And obviously it'll help them in many ways, but maybe pick one rather than pick 10.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that. And I will say, to your point about the writing side of it, one of the other things I did do, which I'm sharing this for anybody who's wishing to be or already a writer and is looking for other, maybe we'll call them strategies for writing. Because I'm not, I don't ever anticipate me teaching a creative writing class. I'll probably be the guy teaching the marketing class with the guy who's teaching the creative writing class, or the girl who is. But one of the things I did, which I've never heard anybody else say, I just did it and it felt right to me, is when I wrote my last book, The Book of Why and How, it was in more of the vein of like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Think and Grow Rich. And those books are written in 37. So they're like a certain style of writing. Well, what I did was I immersed myself in those style of books, and specifically those books, while I was writing, so that I would write the same style. Well, this book here is very similar to Og Mandino's writing style. So I immersed myself into Og Mandino's writing as I was writing the book. So I just wanted to add that, because now there's obviously, it's important to note, not copying their style, not copying the way they are, their actual words, not copying their stories, like literally just talking and thinking in that style of writing, which is a very unique style. Like the way Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill talked in 1937 is obviously different than the way we talk now. Right. And so I wanted to write in a style that I resonated with, and a style that pulled me into reading, because I didn't start reading until age 27, my first book ever. And it was Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends. So I wanted to write in the style that I appreciated. As far as what I would hope people would take from the book, yeah, there are many things. I think ultimately what I would love, so it's about 10 life lessons that Treb shares with Robert. And what I would like people to take from it is, if I think bigger scheme and bigger picture, I would say that none of us are enlightened yet. We're all working toward there. And in fact, a little enigma within the riddle of the book is, who is the enlightened passenger? So what I thought when I wrote it, and the reason the name really stuck out to me, is because it was about a passenger, but there were 2 passengers just on the plane alone that were talking to each other. I thought this will be fascinating, because you could make the argument that either one of them is the enlightened passenger, because Robert's becoming more enlightened on the flight. Treb's already more enlightened. You could make the argument that you as the reader is the enlightened passenger on the journey in the book. You could make the argument, if you pass it to somebody else, you're the enlightened passenger because you passed it to somebody. So I wanted that to be almost ambiguous. And so the big picture I'd like people to realize is, we're all learning. And these 10 life lessons, I think at least one of them there is for somebody to learn that they haven't heard of yet. I'm not going to say, every person hasn't heard of all 10 of them, but I think that there's going to be at least one that somebody goes, either I never heard it before, or I never heard it in that way before. And the other thing is, you don't know this reading it, but I've interviewed 7,500 thought leaders. These are the 10 things that if you put me in a room and said I only had 24 hours to tell my children 10 things before I died, it was important to me for the 10 things to be the 10 things I would tell my children. So I actually took a few things out, saying, you know what, that is important, but it's not as important as it needs to be in this book. So that's the only thing I did a little bit editing, but that still didn't change the story or concept. But as far as the takeaway, that's the bigger thing, is to realize we're always all still learning, and there's something here that could maybe help you on your path. As far as takeaway from reading the book. It's that practical and what we might call conscious or spiritual things can work together. So in other words, in the book, as you know, I talk about the power of no. And I make the case that I've interviewed all these thought leaders. Now, I don't say it in this way in the book because it's through the characters, but I make the case that I've interviewed all these thought leaders, and one of the most common things I discovered is that thought leaders say no 20 to 50 times more than the average person. Now, when I say thought leaders, I'm just saying people that are achieving at the highest level and are impacting a lot of lives that other people say, I want to become like that. And I'm not talking like celebrities or, that type of thing. I'm saying just in general, the people that I talk to that are reaching the most lives tell me over and over again that they say no to almost everything and yes to very few things. And in the book, I talk about, as you know as well, writing a personal mission statement so you can figure out what a no and a yes is. So that's very practical. So that's an example of teachings in the book is why you should say no, how to say no without burning a bridge, and writing a personal mission statement so you know what a no and a yes is. The flip side of that is if we get to the more abstract, I talk about sitting on the plane. The character Trev sits on the plane with James Redfield, who wrote the Celestine Prophecy. Now, all this stuff is loosely based on my life. So I worked with James on a documentary. So I learned firsthand about synchronicity from him. But I made it so that Trev was the character that sat next to the stranger that he didn't know. And all of a sudden, the stranger teaches him about synchronicity. But synchronicity, I said in the book, Les Brown said to me that it's God's way of staying anonymous. But synchronicity for a lot of people would just mean meaningful coincidences. So they're coincidences that have meaning to them. But what I'm getting at with that, Rich, is that in the same book, you're going to learn about something very practical about why you should say no and how to do it, but also something, let's call it mystical or abstract, about when something meaningful happens, pay attention. And as you know, in the book, I share how to pay attention, how to lean into that synchronicity, and how it could change your life. And then the other component to me is I'm a spiritual skeptic. So that's why I made Robert somewhat of a spiritual skeptic, because I felt if you're reading the book and you don't believe this stuff already, I want you to have a passenger in there fighting for you. So Robert's the guy fighting, say, isn't that just a coincidence? That happens all the time. I wanted that person because that's who I was. And I want to reach the people that the spiritual gurus aren't necessarily reaching now. Because I find most people that watch The Secret or read the books are people that are already sold. But I want to reach the people that, maybe this is a big reach, but maybe that truck driver that normally would say, what synchronicity? What the heck is that? I want to reach that person because that's who I was. So again, long answer, but hopefully that kind of helped summarize that.
No, and I actually wanted you to talk a little bit about synchronicity. So I want to ask you. You just answered some of my questions I had on that front. So thanks for expanding in that area. No, it's just the book. It must have been hard to narrow it down to the 10, as you said, and then you just presented it in a fun way in a fiction book. So you made it fun and something we can learn, and we become the enlightened passenger. So that's what I really thought was neat about it. It was just a fun read, but I was enlightened by the time I was done reading it. So what one or two books, and maybe this is have shaped your journey? And I'm a big reader, so I don't know if I could say here's one or two, but maybe what one or two books have really shaped your journey?
So I'm going to give a quick answer to this, but I'm also going to say it is hard. So if I were just to pull books out of the air, I've already named them. So if I had to pull books out of the air, How to Win Friends and Think and Grow Rich. How to Win Friends was the first book I ever read. So that changed everything. And Think and Grow Rich was the second book. And I always said, if you're going to start late, start with those two books because you're already ahead of the game. But, those are the easy answers always for me. So I'm going to give you a quick other answer too, because I don't think it's fair to always say the exact same ones. So I would say if I go beyond that, I would probably lean towards like The Four Agreements would be another one that changed my life. The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma was another big one for me. And that's a parable too, by the way. The other one I've mentioned, I guess, yeah. Out of the ones I've been mentioned today, the other guy, and I don't know if I have him, I know I have some of his books near me, but is who I mentioned earlier, Og Mandino. So I really got into his writing. So I haven't even read all his books yet, which is amazing to me because I got more to discover. I've read maybe only like 5 of them, and I think he has like 30. But The Greatest Salesman in the World and The Greatest Salesman in the World 2, which is a rare time when both books I feel are equally as good as each other. Those two books really had a big impact on me. Totally different than what I wrote. Like these are based back in the days of like Bethlehem and stuff. And it's just scrolls that they talked about. Like he was going in and revealing the scrolls and helping become a rich man. Like it's a different premise, but they are 10, I think they're 10 scrolls if I remember correctly. So that's the only through line, but they are also about 10 lessons taught by one person to another. But it's I mean, there's not even a glimpse of the idea being the same, but it's just the 10 lessons. I think 10's a magical number anyway. I will say the struggle with the book is I wanted it to be less because I feel 10's so many to remember. But then I thought if I only put 3 and somebody reads it and they know those 3, then I'm not reaching them. So I thought 10 is a way that you might not carry all 10 with you forever, but you'll remember the 3 that you like the most. So
No.
those would be the books that I would add that changed my life.
Sure. And I noticed in the book, I guess, a picture of you with Bob Proctor in the book. And I know he passed away a year or 2 ago, and I was a big fan of his, listening to him and reading his books. And I just really only came across him maybe 2 years ago. What is one thing? So it looked like maybe, did you interview him at one point?
I did. And
Okay.
yeah, at the front of the book, we have a thing. People will see this when they get the book, that they get access to 2 interviews that that we did, that they'll get access to if they jump onto our community. But interesting, I'm glad you brought it up, because I realized you have an author copy, and I realized we still need to get that website set up in the next couple of days, because the launch is heavily underway right now. But yeah, so I interviewed Bob Proctor a couple of times. 2019, before his passing, I did an interview for a documentary project that we were working on that got kind of sidelined from COVID and never really has brought itself back to life. Also in the book, the picture below that is Lisa Nichols from The Secret as well. And both of them, I interviewed them on that same sort of tour. I've interviewed Lisa many times since, but interviewed them both on the same tour. But Bob Proctor, there's so many directions I could go from there. I will say a fascinating side note or backstory is I interviewed Bob. That interview was at his house by his pool, and I got to hold, and in fact, in the picture, I think I am, but hold his 60-some-year-old copy of Think and Grow Rich that he read from every day. And then I got to do an interview with Bob's son, Brian, this
Right.
past September in Bob's studio holding the same book.
And I read his son wrote a book, I guess, as a tribute to him. And I just finished that about a month ago. And it was just I felt like I knew it was just a wonderful book to read. As I read it, I thought, oh my God, it was just a terrific tribute.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing book. My Father Knew the Secret is what it's called, for those that want to check it out. And yeah, and so with Bob, I mean, there's so many things I took from him, but some big ones, like a big one that stands out, which is not something that he said, is that this guy was 85, I believe, at the time I was interviewing him. And I felt like I could have asked him to do a cartwheel and he would have been able to do a cartwheel and a backflip. Like he had the energy of a 25-year-old. And I do believe you see that from somebody. I mean, I've studied this, so I probably can say, I don't want to say with fact because I'm not a doctor, but I felt that the people that take vitamin P, what I call it, which is fine, living on purpose, are people that seem to always remain somewhat young. They seem to remain healthy, young, vibrant, and Bob was that person. So one of the big lessons to me was that he lived his life in the way that he preached. And so that was a biggie. And then I think the other one, which I'm still working on, is the consistency. The fact that he read from that same book. The guy told him, and I know the day, I think it's 62 years or 63, because Brian, his son, was born the same year he was gifted that book. And so Brian said that he read from that book every day from the day the guy said to him, if you want to be successful, this book will change your life. You need to read this book every day. And Bob never missed a day, to my understanding, in 60-some years. That level of consistency, I mean, even if you can do it a tenth of that, you're going to be successful. And so again, another takeaway from him was the fact that if you're going to do something, you owe it to yourself to do it to your all. And I'm still working on getting better at that. But that guy, he knew that. And of course, the flip side of that is he impacted more lives than any of us will probably ever know.
No, he was amazing, and that's one thing I learned from him is it's just read a book multiple times. So I've read a good number of his books, and I keep reading them and keep reading them. I keep hearing Bob Proctor behind me saying, "Keep reading them, Rich. Keep reading them," because it's definitely true. You can't read a book just once, and he drilled that into my mind through listening to him. What I guess what mentors have shaped you today, or even if you just want to name one, or if we just named that one, that's fine too. We talked about.
I feel guilty, and I say guilty in a positive way, about the fact that my life has allowed me to sit across from a lot of the people that have transformed my life,
That's true.
and have unique experiences too that just seem surreal. So saying that's to say I have many mentors. I feel like a lot of them are mentors. I mean, I believe even if I would have never met any of these people that changed my life so dramatically, just reading their books, they were my mentors.
Right.
Weird example, because it's like if I randomly pick something out of the air, I'm picking it because the what happened was so absurd in the sense that it should never have happened in my life. But it's one that stands out. And I see him as a mentor, but as again, not a mentor like in the traditional sense. That would be a different answer. Like if my grandfather was probably my biggest mentor. So if I went to the traditional sense, I would go my grandfather, or James Redfield, who I mentioned earlier with Celestine. I get a chance to work with him, staying at his guest house multiple times. I would say that was closer to a mentor protege type situation. But an absurd one, who I still view as a mentor, was I got to interview Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong at the Troubadour on Sunset Strip. So growing up a kid, I was like, it was like I would live in a small town in Canada. The idea that I would ever be on the Sunset Strip, like people would tell me I was out to lunch, even thinking I could dream about even just walking on the Sunset Strip. And to know I got to inside the Troubadour, looking at Tommy's picture with him and Cheech, interviewing Tommy in front of me and having it on video, that was surreal. I mean, the Tommy being a mentor is not the surreal part. It's just what happened was surreal. But I even look at him as a mentor, like somebody who went to prison, and you could argue the logistics of whether it was right or wrong that he went and all that stuff. That's two separate types of people argue on both sides of that. But the fact that he went in there and he read the I Ching and he changed his life again, and like, and that he believes in meditation and stillness and all these things that we were traditionally taught, like a musical comic or a musician wouldn't think of back when we were growing up. Like the fact that he's continued to grow and is open to growing. And then he's just also like a very charming guy that like is very, I don't know, very approachable and not just charismatic, but very like, hey, how can I help you? Hey, how's it going, buddy? Like just very, I mean, I feel like that's a mentorship too, because it teaches you how to be humble. Here's a person that's achieved it all really in their field. I mean, I would argue that Cheech and Chong, as far as comedy duos go, you got to put them in the top 10. And and played at the Troubadour. Like they did stuff that nobody else did, because they were playing with rock bands and metal bands and bands from the 60s, and they were the only comic duo. Like they shouldn't even been able to survive. Like you think the audience would have torn them apart, but they loved them. They did iconic stuff. And for him to be so humble and and just somebody who's got so much wisdom to share, I mean, that's a mentor to me. So that was a random poll, but it's something I never shared. So I thought I would go in a direction I'd never gone.
No, that was neat. That makes sense. So how do you stay grounded and focused, on your work? Like, do you have any practices that you find helpful? I'm just curious.
I do. I'll show you one.
Sure.
I don't know if it's a practice. It's like, it's not, I guess it is. It's a practice for how I stay, how I was going to say cognitive, but that's a big word. So I'll say how I have a reminder every day to live a certain way, respond a certain way when crap happens. And so I carry 2 poker chips around with me. Now, I just got back in a trip, so both of them are not in my pocket like they normally would be. But this is one of them, and I don't even know where the other one is. I got it here somewhere. But this one says E plus R equals O. The other one says PMA. And E plus R equals O, that stands for event plus response equals outcome. So in the real world, what that means is every day we're hit with an event, like price of gas goes up. We talk about inflation. There's, this and, any event that happens, somebody breaks up with you. Those are the events. Most cases, Rich, you can't change the event. But what you can do is choose your response, and it'll always get you an outcome. So what I mean by that is, let's say, I'll give you a real world example. My mother and I are in a drive-through at a coffee shop, Mother's Day, guys yelling at us behind in his car, get out of the line, I'm in a hurry, all this kind of stuff, swearing at us. My mother didn't hear him because she's partially deaf. We're driving up the road. I decided to tell her what she said. And she said, what did he say? Turn this car around. I want to go back and have a talk to that guy. And in my TED talk, the last one, she said she wanted to go back and punch him in the throat. But I think I Hollywoodized that. I think she just said, I want to talk to him. And then I said, but Mom, it's Mother's Day. Maybe he doesn't know his mother. Maybe he was in jail. Maybe, and he didn't get to meet his mother. Maybe he was adopted. Maybe his mother was horrible to him. So maybe he sees a mother and a son in the car, and it's not about us at all. It's about what's going on in his life. Seeing it from that perspective, my mom switched and said, I never thought of it that way. We should go back and buy that sweetheart a coffee. Now, I want to point out, Rich, the event didn't change. But would you agree that if we go back and punch him in the throat or have a talk to him, we're going to have a different outcome if we go back and buy him a coffee? I think
Definitely.
everybody would say yes, right? So my point is I carry this chip around with me, and when crap happens, this is my reminder.
Okay.
Crap doesn't have to control how I deal with crap. And the other one is PMA, which stands for positive mental attitude. So it's just for me to be a reminder constantly that I have the choice of what my mental attitude is like. So those are, I guess you would call them rituals. And then you read about it in the book, but I have a synchronicity journal that I carry around with me.
Oh,
Um,
neat.
and yeah, and I write like when stuff happens that shouldn't happen in a day. Like this one here, which is wild, is I had that red poker chip I just told you about at an event I spoke at in Miami. I talked about it. A girl was really interested in it, but I didn't have it with me. I went to my bag, and a guy asked me for a pen to write on our evaluation forms. I pulled it out, and the chip fell in my hand. So I saw the girl stand there. The event was over. I walked over and showed it to her and said, "This is the chip I was telling you about, the red poker chip." And we talked about it for a bit. She tried to guess what it stood for, PMA. Anyway, I gave her the chip. I said, "Do you want this?" And she said, "Thank you so much." And when after about 30 seconds or minutes, she started crying. And I thought, "Uh-oh, what did I do wrong now? How did that happen?" And she said, I asked her about it. She said, no, what it is, I wasn't thinking about this, but she said, 6 months ago, my boyfriend overdosed. And she said he was in the program, AA, and they have colored chips here. And the last one he showed me for it being in recovery and having 60 days was a red poker chip. And now you just gave me a red poker chip, which
Wow.
reminds me of the fact that he's looking over me. And I'll just show you here on the video side. You can see right here, red poker chip, Camille's boyfriend.
Wow.
So
Neat.
what I mean is I make notes of those, and people will tell you, my wife especially, I have more synchronicities than anybody she knows. I think it's because I write it down and I tell the universe I want more of them, and because I write it down, I notice when they happen.
Neat.
So
No,
those are
that's
some.
neat. No, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'll kind of wrap it up. Can you share any exciting upcoming projects you're working on? Other than, I know you told me you have 2 more books coming. If there's anything else you want to share, I would love to hear it. That you're okay with sharing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll say this, as far as sharing, and it also, so this is something we have coming up, and it also circles back into why you would want to buy the book as well. So it's a double whammy. The book itself, if people buy it in the pre-order stage and probably early into the launch, official launch, that it's on the street stage, they actually get 5 bonuses that you won't be able to get later on. So that's one cool reason to buy it. I mean, it's a $16.95 US book. And at the same time, when you buy it on our website, which I can share, what's really cool is it still takes you, like the links are there, so it still takes you to the retailer. So you're paying no difference. You're buying from nobody different. It's just you come back with the order number and you get the bonuses. But the other thing, which we haven't been talking about as much, is probably around August, and I haven't set a date, so I don't want to lie and say I have, but around August-ish, we're going to do a book club with the
Oh,
book.
neat. Neat.
And so right now, anybody of the people that have signed up for the book, almost 50% have signed up for the book club. So when you buy the book, it sends you an email and it says, "Oh, if you want to sign up for the upcoming book club." But what you still don't know until, right now, or depending on if I've shared it one other time, maybe, is what we're planning to do is a special event around the book club. I think we're going to do it over 2 nights, so 2 separate nights of the book club. And the reason we're going to do that is I'm reaching out to my network, and I don't want to give hints away, or I should say, I don't want to give names away, but we're trying to square up both nights 2 major names that would come on, and maybe for 25, 30 minutes, I would do an interview with them. And so, in other words, you'll get to go into breakout rooms and talk about the book, just like a book club. But then we're going to bring on some special guests that you normally wouldn't get access to. I won't say names, but I'll give a hint and say, this won't tell you really who it is, but I'll say one of them has put out almost 100 books and is considered on the same sort of level as Bob Proctor, same type of level. Another one of them, the people we're talking to, has been in The Secret on Oprah, multiple New York Times bestselling books. And I won't go much more than there, but I'll just say we're looking to bring on some really big guests. Also, what we're doing, but I say this lightly because this being evergreen, it might be after we've done it. Not to say you can't reach out and ask us for a replay, but leading up to the book and just after, we have an event lined up in June where we're doing a live interview with Brian Austin Green. So he's people would know him from 90210 or Anger Management. And then Randy Spelling, so Tori Spelling's brother,
Right.
is also 90210. And what's that?
No, right. I know some of these names
Okay.
that you're saying. That's
Perfect.
neat.
Awesome. And then Sharna Burgess, who is married to Brian and also on Dancing with the Stars. So that's one event. I've been kind of saying we'll probably likely talk about 90210 at least once. So that's the 90210 crew. Also have one coming up. I haven't announced with JJ Virgin, meaning an event we're doing. I have another one coming up with Richard Paul Evans, who wrote The Christmas Box. He's a 46-time New York Times bestselling author. He wrote the foreword on the book. And then Mark Victor Hansen from Chicken Soup for the Soul. And then one that hasn't been announced yet, and I'll say we're doing it, and then I'll take back and say we haven't locked it, but we're literally sharing dates with Ken Honda and Janet Atwood, who's she wrote The Passion Test, and Ken is from Mind Valley and he wrote Happy Money. And
Right.
so those are 4 events that are all coming up in the next, say, 4 or 5 weeks that if you buy the book, you actually get access to basically all of those. And these are all live. And on top of that, like I said, you also know how to get access to the book club, which is also going to be, we're hoping for it to be next level. I will say the reason for the book club partly is because I know a lot of people buy books and don't read them. And so we're trying to give people an incentive to read them. So we're basically saying, and we're going to run a contest and a bunch of other stuff, but basically we're saying, hey, let's get together, let's hang out, let's talk about the book. And let's make it so that you get to meet people you wouldn't otherwise ask them your questions to give you an incentive to even show up. But I know enough about book clubs to know if you show up and it's only a 100-page book, you're going to try to read the book first so you show up and can talk about the book. So it's, it's a win-win, I'll say. But those are some things we have coming up that's all surrounding the book, all probably going to take place in the next 8+ weeks. But yeah, so now's really the time. If a person's hearing this, I would say they said what the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. Well, I'll say the best time to buy the book is now, because if you're hearing this during this early timeline, we have a lot of cool events coming up that you can jump into that normally, realistically, probably should be thousands or at least hundreds of dollars to attend.
Right. No, a lot of neat, exciting things. Thanks for sharing all of that. So no, I just wanted to wrap it up and, thank you for your time. This has been a whole lot of fun for me just to meet you and listen to you and share your journey to this book and other neat experiences. So thanks so much. I know that your book, The Enlightened Passenger, definitely will help my community. I'm excited to share our conversation with my community frequently and hopefully point more and more people to the book and to you and to all the work you do. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Rich.